And now on WRS, Michael McKay with the McKay Interview.
Hello everyone, I hope you've all had a great summer, coped with the social distancing and were not locked in quarantine anywhere unpleasant. I'm starting this autumn session of the McKay Interview by moving away from the pandemic and focusing, with the help of an old friend, on something somewhere beautiful, dramatic and complex. No matter where you were on the 4th of August, you must surely have been aware of the huge explosion in the port of Beirut. According to Lebanon's team at the United Nations, the explosion was like 15 years of war in 15 seconds, comparing its impact to the devastation of the country's civil war that lasted from 1975 to 1990. Now, it was my good fortune to be reunited by a complete chance about a year ago with an old Lebanese friend who lived here in Geneva and then went back to Lebanon. Now, we all know that Lebanon has been living through some of the toughest times in recent history following the October 17th uprisings and the severe economic crisis that the country is going through, COVID-19. And as if all that were not enough, the epic explosion of August the 4th. It cost the lives of nearly 200 people, 7,000 wounded, and over 300,000 left homeless. Bear in mind, listeners, that Geneva's population is 500,000, just to give you some sense of comparison. I've asked my friend to talk to me about Lebanon and to try to explain as dispassionately as he can, and he accepted and said that he would try. My guest today is Nabil Canaan, as I said, an old friend, Lebanese Swiss, who describes himself as a cultural producer, multimedia filmmaker, development consultant, and brand marketing professional. We're sitting in the relaxed comfort of the Hotel Beau Rivage in Geneva. Nabil, welcome to the McKay Interview. It's really good to see you again, and thanks for making time for me and accepting my invitation.
Thank you, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
It's good to see you. Nabil, we've known each other a long time, at least 25 years, maybe even longer, from the time when we first met and worked together in Geneva. But you went back to Lebanon. When was that? When did you go back?
Well, after we were working together, I did quite a few things. I went back to university, did a master's in film and journalism, worked for the New York Times for a few years. Then I worked in development here in Geneva, doing projects with some of the UN agencies in Ghana, Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan, etc. And then I ran a film production company in Geneva with Koreans, and then I went to Beirut and set up the new activity, and I'll tell you a little bit about it.
And then by complete chance, we bumped into each other again about a year ago. And you told me a little bit about what you've been doing in Lebanon. I know we're going to talk about that as we have the conversation. Now, I thought a lot about whether or not to start our conversation with the terrible explosion of the 4th of August. But that's part of the reason why you're here safely in Geneva now. So let's start with what happened. Were you in Beirut at the time? And tell me what you know about the blast. And then after that, we can talk about other things. And if there's time, come back to the impact of that terrible tragedy before we finish. Were you in Beirut at the time?
No, it so happened, I have to thank my guardian angels, that I actually took the direct flight out a couple of days before. It was the 4th flight since lockdowns, direct to Switzerland. So I took it because I have some family matters to deal with here. The blast happened around 6 p.m. on the 4th of August, a Tuesday. It blew up. There was the first explosion and then a second one. I think probably many of your listeners have seen some of the dramatic images of what has been termed the largest man-made non-nuclear explosion since World War II.
I read somewhere that it was a quarter of the size of Nagasaki or Hiroshima.
Yeah, 3.3 on the Richter scale, registered in California. They heard the explosion about 300 kilometers away in Cyprus. In Beirut itself, they say it's due to the 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate that were stored unsafely at the port, and there was some weld there, and a spark went off. That's the official line. The result of it is it blew away whole neighborhoods in Beirut, around the port, obviously, the whole Ashrafiyeh area, Karantina, Jaitewe, Marmkhail, etc. These are areas that house a lot of old tenants, but also a lot of young people who mix together very nicely, and it's kind of the hub of the nightlife scene in Beirut, bars, restaurants, where artists live and work, rehearsal spaces, studios, venues, etc.
And you said it was an evening explosion, not a morning explosion.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you gave the numbers before of the casualties and wounded. What is absolutely miraculous, considering the scale of this explosion, there's incredible amounts of damage, material damage, I think estimated about $10 billion of, you know, heritage buildings that are falling apart, whole facades of buildings blown away, windows, doors. And obviously, the human toll of this is casualties, wounded. When we say wounded, very often, you know, in the press, we just, you know, whiz by that. But these can be terminal wounds, physical wounds. But the most damaging is the psychological wounds. I mean, just the aftershock and the wave of that bomb in people's bodies. You know, I was speaking to an aunt yesterday. She was telling me, like, we lived 15 years of war. We never felt anything like this. I still feel the explosion, the pressure in my body. So what has happened is people have run down in solidarity to help. So there's a lot of immediate emergency relief happening. You know, this is amidst a situation where the country is completely collapsing. I can't call it a cherry on the cake. It's really the neutron bomb that just blew up something that was, you know, a context that was already disastrous.
Now we're going to come back to that because we've got sufficient time to talk, but we cannot talk about Lebanon unless we know something of the complex history. And I can imagine that the vast majority of the people listening to our program this morning won't know the detail. And although the program isn't a history lesson, Nabil, I'm going to ask you, please, to explain, if I put it to you this way, how did Lebanon get to where it is today?
Okay, so...
If you could do that.
Yeah, we'll do a little bit of historiography.
From Ottoman.
From the Ottoman.
Not to go back to the Phoenicians. I mean, that's 2000, you know.
Yeah.
Please.
So I'll try as succinctly as possible. The whole area was under Ottoman rule until the end of the First World War. In the middle of the First World War, French and British interests were already at work to plan how to divvy up the end of the Ottoman Empire, while the war was still going on. So there were certain agreements that were made, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the Balfour Declaration, that, like in Africa and other colonial areas, got the Levant area, Eastern Mediterranean, got carved up between the British and the French. The French carved out Syria, and Syria existed. Lebanon didn't exist as a country. And the French, working a lot with one of the communities in the area, the Maronite Christians, basically carved out Lebanon from Syria. The English were in Palestine and Egypt and wanted to secure the Suez Canal around the Arabian Gulf to the Raj,
to India.
To India.
Interest there, yeah.
So Lebanon was declared on the 1st of September 1920 by the French and Lebanese government. And the French stayed on under a League of Nations construct called the Mandate, effectively colonization, from 1920 to about 1943. And contrary to many other colonies, I may be a bit controversial by saying this, but I will be quoting historian Samir Kassir, who wrote a great social history of Beirut. The Lebanese were sufficiently, I'm going to put a positive spin on this, aware that they needed to connect with modernity. In the same way, the Ottomans realized once the European ships started appearing outside Constantinople, Istanbul, that they had basically missed the industrialization boat, and were scrambling at the end of their reign to set up reforms, the Tanzimat they were called, but they were too late. And the Ottoman Empire fell apart and was divvied up. And in Lebanon, the people who were there, I think, realized that they needed to connect with modernity. And they saw this opportunity through the French.
And how do they do that? Through the French?
Yeah, through the French. And so, there was the French did a lot, whether it's in bringing in universities, infrastructure, adding French-inspired law on top of Ottoman law, and a number of other modernizations.
And this is the golden period when
not
it was
yet
called the Paris of... Not yet.
No. Okay. So this was till 43, and in 40, around that period where the independence was the independence of quote unquote war, or drive for independence, which the Lebanese got. And from 43 till about 75, there was incredible development that happened in the country. Lebanon quickly, the constitution is based on an ultra-liberal market approach, where the forefathers of the nation saw that as an opportunity for people, entrepreneurs, to make it based on meritocracy. That's what it says on paper. The actual fact is that the country, the way the constitution was set up, is that the president would always have to be a Maronite Christian. Before I say that, Lebanon is constituted of about 18 different sects, and of which largely there's Christian and Muslim ones.
In a population of?
5 million.
5 million, 18.
Yeah, 18 sects.
Okay,
yeah.
That's already quite a lot.
Yeah, so Christian, Muslim, Judaism. So that's about 18. And within the Christians, for instance, you have the traditional Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, but then you have local particularities, whether it's Syriac Catholic, Armenian Orthodox, Greek Catholic, etc. So it gets pretty funky fast. And the Maronites being the largest Christian demographic, in the Constitution it says the president has to be Maronite, the prime minister Sunni, and the speaker of parliament Shiite. So that already, although it was seen as a way of having representation of the different communities, it was seeding ethnic sectarianism or sectarianism. But on the market side, Lebanon quickly positioned itself as a go-to place for finance, tourism, real estate, and these were kind of the pillars of the industry of industry in Lebanon. And hotels popped up. I mean, it's a Mediterranean country, and during that period, around the world, there was a lot of development going on. Lebanon seized the opportunity of being a little bit more in advance than the rest of the Arab-speaking world. Petrol hadn't been discovered yet in the Gulf, etc. But as soon as it did, as soon as it was discovered, the Gulf Arabs needed someone to help finance that, help build their countries with all the revenues they were getting. And the Lebanese were very good at setting up infrastructures within Lebanon, but also probably one of the best exports of Lebanon is its own people.
Absolutely. I mean, I've met them all over the world.
Exactly.
True, yeah.
And the diaspora, we don't have official figures, but it numbers probably about 12 million people, of which 7 million alone are in Brazil.
So a lot of that money flow came back into Lebanon and helped to make it rich and prosperous. The Paris of the Mediterranean.
Yeah, so I steer away from cliches and stereotypical terms like that, because it's
That's-
also
that's-
called
that-
the Switzerland
Yeah,
of the Middle East.
Exactly, but
Yeah.
people talk about that.
Because we're in Geneva, I'll maybe speak more to the Switzerland of the Middle East. I think the links, however theoretical they are, have to do with banking secrecy, mountains, skiing, the diversity of the population, and Lebanon positioning itself and actually living through being one of the islands of, I'll say, pseudo-democracy in the region. And that freedom of speech, freedom of movement, the creativity and the culture industries that developed there gave Lebanon this positioning across the Arab-speaking world as this diamond. And, with nation building comes a lot of myth making. And the Lebanese are pretty good at marketing. And I think they positioned themselves very well. We positioned ourselves very well. And I think, the 12 million diaspora have done a lot as ambassadors for the country. Because for all intents and purposes, Lebanon is defined by its geography more than by its natural resources. So its geostrategic importance is based on its geography.
And it's the case of many countries, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the islands off the continent, Switzerland and the mountains and the valleys.
Yeah. Beirut, for me, Beirut or Lebanon is two things. And I'm going to stick my neck out here. One of them is historically, from the Ottoman period, just to stay with that time zone, is a refuge for minorities from around the region. Whether they're Shia, Kurd, Armenians, all the different small Christian sects, Druze, all these are minorities in the region.
And you're not talking about refugees here. You're
No.
talking about,
The people who lived there
Yeah.
at the time of the constitution of the country,
Yeah.
the Armenians, following the genocide in Turkey, obviously flowed in. Kurds are there also, Palestinians after the Nakba in 48 and then 67. So on one side, for me, it's a refuge for minorities. And on the other side, a thing that defines the raison d'etre of the country is the port of Beirut. The fact that it was the gateway to the east as well as the connection to the west. And Lebanon and Lebanese played that card and became part of their identity, is being this kind of conduit of obviously capital, goods, but also ideas. And I think that's a very critical part about why Lebanon is important and why the eventual disappearance of Lebanon can be a very, very bad thing for the region.
I've been to Beirut a couple of times, and I saw the terrible damage in Martyrs Square in '93, and I went back again about 7 years later and saw the amazing way that it had been rebuilt. Nabil, can that happen again? Can it be rebuilt again? Or will Lebanon be yet another example of a Middle Eastern country interfered with by outside external powers? What do you think?
Well, so 43 to 75, the country developed tremendously. The oil embargo and problems that happened in the 70s helped the Lebanese economy actually a lot. The Palestinians in Lebanon, after Jordan, were setting up guerrilla warfare against the state of Israel, destabilized an already tense situation in the country. It went into 15 years of war. And the period you came right after the war, early 90s, had definitely the capital, Beirut, and the big parts of the country were in devastation. What happened after that was Saudi-backed Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, who came in and set about to jumpstart the economy. And he came up with his people with a pretty innovative way of speeding up the master plan of reconstruction of downtown Beirut by basically setting up a company called Solidaire, Société Libanaise for the Development and Reconstruction, and expropriated people's lands downtown, saying, I'm keeping it simple here, saying, well, if we have to wait for all the inheritors and all the different interests to come together and agree on the master plan, it's going to take forever. We need to get the country going right away. So they expropriated land and set about with reconstruction with massive debts that were incurred by the state. That reconstruction started, and I think it's very important to say that right after the war, two phenomena happened. One is amnesty of all the warlords, except President General Aoun, who fled to France, and one of the Christian warlords who was imprisoned for 11 years.
So they were forgiven their sins, in other words?
Well, amnesty for all these guys, and they all went into government.
I see.
And the second thing that happened was amnesia. And that's dramatic because the government basically said, we're not going to look at what happened in the past 15 years. We're just going to turn the page and try and build the Singapore of the Middle East. Dubai hadn't really kicked off then. And during these 15 years of coma that the country was in, the rest of the world kept advancing. So Beirut came back on the stage, but the world stage had changed by then. So Beirut was scrambling internally to build, with internal tensions by the different warlords who these people were born out of chaos, and all they know is how to steal or kill people and wheel and deal. So and the Syrian military intelligence apparatus was in the country during this period. And in 2005, the Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, who had overseen a lot of this reconstruction, got assassinated.
I remember that.
And that brought down the wall of fear against the presence of Syrian mukhabarat, which is the secret police, basically. And, Lebanon, like most of the Arab countries, was living not with an official dictatorship, but with the fear of the Syrian dictatorship into Lebanon. And they went down into the streets in 2005 in protest of the assassination of Hariri. That picked up international support, primarily by the French, Jacques Chirac. A UN resolution was passed, and the Syrians were, in no uncertain terms, asked to leave the country. So that was 15 years after the war, and then the last 15 years now has been basically a kind of artificial buoyancy of the economy and a rapid degradation in the past couple of years.
Do you think, is it possible that Lebanon can heal itself from within, or is the country basically too stratified to do this successfully, and does it need external help? And if it does, what kind of help should that be?
Well, because there was amnesia after the war, no one actually dealt with the trauma of the war. So there is a whole generation, which is basically my parents' generation and my generation. I was born just before the war. That are, the parents totally traumatized. I call them Prozac Nation. And then us, who received all their anxiety, it was injected into us. And my generation basically are the ones who rebuilt Lebanon. And there's a new generation now who wants something else. And what we have seen since October 17th is the final ras-le-bol, enough is enough, by the Lebanese, huge proportions of the Lebanese. It's not everybody, who want change, who want this whole clientelist, patronage, nepotic system of sectarianism, of corruption to be dismantled. That's it. They've had it with that. We've been experiencing massive exodus of the population for decades now. And then your previous question about regional interests or foreign interests.
That's what I was going to ask you. I mean, it may sound like a naive question, but it's relevant to what you've just been saying, is to tell me who, in your opinion, are those who wish Lebanon well and those who don't wish Lebanon well, and what motivates them. Because what I'm trying to understand, as we don't have a lot of time, is, what is pulling the place apart, and if there is any glue left that will hold it together.
Well, what's pulling it apart are international. So on three levels: the international, regional, and local. On the local level, I don't think the Lebanese people or the Lebanese government, even though it is on paper a sovereign nation, I don't think they're in control of their destiny. Actually, there's too many powerful regional and international interests that play the differences between the Lebanese, and the Lebanese allow that to happen. And so there is some responsibility that needs to be taken by the Lebanese for having allowed regional interests to for having kept porous borders and an overly flexible system to allow regional interests and international ones to play. So on one side you have the America, France, Saudi, let's say liberal side, for want of a better term. And on the other side, you have the Iran, Syria, Russia side. Russia, new player in the neighborhood,
sure.
And the one that is rearing its head is China. So they have an interest because they have on one side, they say they have communities. Like Iran will say there's the Shia community in Lebanon, we're taking care of them. The Saudis will say they're Sunnis, the French will say they're Catholics. So that's playing to the emotional. The reality is realpolitik, and since oil was discovered on the East Mediterranean, offshore oil was discovered in the past few years, there's obviously money involved. But the geographic location of Lebanon north of Israel is the sensitive one, where on one side Iran projects. So Iran, country under sanctions, that projects. The Iranian regime being sanctioned and therefore putting 80 million people under a suffering situation, are belligerent, look to export their 1979 revolution, and have projected power into the region asymmetrically. They are not, since the Iraq War in the 80s, they are not going full-on nation-to-nation war. But
proxy war.
Proxy wars, and have developed militias all across what we'll call the Fertile Crescent, Iraq, Syria, into Lebanon, obviously involved in other theaters like Libya, Yemen, a little bit in Bahrain. And Hezbollah is the militia that Iran has built since '82 in Lebanon, that initially, like most Islamist parties, provided social education services to their community that the government wasn't providing. It's a similar story across the Arab world, except this is a Shia Islamist group. So they started there also as
it's a similar warlord story in many countries.
Yes,
yeah.
And they then developed into a military, they were doing terrorist activities for a while during the war with car bombs, but then developed into a military power and a political party. So they do have a representation in government. They actually control the government. In actual fact, they're in the shadows, and they pull the strings in Lebanon, i.e. Iran pulls the strings on the domestic side. Regionally, I think the Americans messed up really badly in the Middle East. And if we just take it from 2003, not to go further back, they basically destroyed Iraq, allowed Iran into Iraq. The Syrian People's Revolution went, Hafez al-Assad wasn't going to, Bashar al-Assad, his son, wasn't going to have any of that. So that developed into a civil war that allowed Iran to get in as well, and therefore closer to Israel. And that tension with Israel is something that brings the Americans in as well. So Lebanon is not master of its destiny. There are many players who have an interest in using Lebanon as a host for their proxy wars. And the problem is the Lebanese have allowed them to do that. Is there a glue that that makes Lebanon a nation? This is what today we have to be defining.
Okay, so that brings you to the last question. Unfortunately, the clock is really racing against us, but I have to ask you this last question, which maybe you can bring it together, because it's to look forward. In your opinion, are there scenarios for Lebanon's future? What are their immediate needs? And as we're in Geneva, home of the United Nations, city which is in the Confederation of Switzerland, is there a role for the UN? Or could Lebanon learn from the way the Swiss Confederation works and the way that different languages and different cultures live peacefully together? And what do you think must happen to get the country back on its feet, given the context that we are sitting having this conversation in Geneva, in Switzerland? It's an impossible question, but I had to ask it to you.
Postdoctoral thesis question.
Do your best.
Yeah, the Lebanese tried to build what you could term a consociational democracy, which is what we have here in Switzerland and maybe a little bit in Belgium and Canada. Which is a model where different ethnicities can live together. That model has shown that it doesn't work in Lebanon. Because on top of this confederation framework, in Lebanon, there is still a system that is still kind of neo-feudal with people, because the state is so weak, purposely, people revert to
family and tribal loyalties.
Yeah, so it's not tribal like in the Libyan way. It's maybe more clanic or family based, but they do that instinct to go back to what we call the Zaim by having a wasta, a connection, wink wink, to get anything done in the country. That is the system that seeds corruption. And so that's why I say that what we need is a decolonization of our minds, first of all. You know, François Macron turning up 48 hours after the explosion on the 4th of August with not a single member of the government having till today gone down to visit. And Macron just pops in, you know, hi guys, I'm going to, you know, get some reforms going, political changes, don't worry, France is going to take care of you. And then at the same time, there were about 60,000 signatures a petition asking for France to take over Lebanon again for the next 10 years under its tutelage. Basically, you know, can you come and babysit us because we tried, it didn't work, and we're still pooping in our diapers, so can you take care of us? It's a bit crazy. On the other side, you have Hezbollah saying, well, no, we need to break away from the orbit of the West, and why don't we look east? Historically, you would have said, or recently you would have said, look east towards Iran, which nobody in Lebanon wants to, I mean, most people don't want to look at. And anyways, Iran's practically broke because of the sanctions. But China could be interested. China would be interested. Why? It gets support beyond the Piraeus. They could build and operate, and then, I don't know what political dimension would come into the port of Beirut. They have the money and the experience.
And they've done it before, exactly.
Yeah, and in no time. So those tensions are around. There's also a scramble, I think, right now, 2020, to change what is on the ground, to kind of put the situation into one of a fait accompli, so that when the American elections happen in November, whoever moves into the White House would have to operate with this new situation. The immediate needs in the country post-blast, well, I have to say this, is that between October 17th and the blast that happened on the 4th of August, the country has been on one side trying to rise up against this corrupt system, then gets, with financial meltdown of the meltdown of the financial industry, financial sector, people not being allowed to take their money out, capital controls, hyperinflation kicking in, unemployment just shooting through the roof, just a complete breakdown of the economy at such an incredibly rapid pace. And then we get hit by Corona, 2 months lockdown, come out, Ramadan, and then from the beginning of June, social unrest has started. So we are now navigating, and then the blast happens. So the immediate needs right now are humanitarian. But in order to jumpstart the economy again, one needs to be putting in place midterm and long-term plans to restart the economy and create some kind of sustainability. My main hope is that the young generation will become more aware of what it takes to be a citizen, about the importance of the rule of law, what citizenship means and engagement as a nation, and define that the identity of Lebanon beyond tabbouleh and hummus and dabke and the cliches, and put down the foundation for what can be a healthy, safe, clean, and forward-looking society.
No, but we have to finish it there because of the time. But clearly, two things. One, you're right, it's a doctoral thesis. My questions to you were always unfair to try and condense all of that into half an hour. I think there's a second interview there, maybe sometime next year after the American elections, to see how things do turn out. Thanks for explaining. Thanks for, you want to make one more quick point?
Yeah, to Geneva listeners here, I'm very thankful to what Switzerland has been doing in terms of emergency help right now, from the embassy to the Swiss people. There's a lot of needs. There are a lot of needs right now, humanitarian needs. You can look at bonheur.ch for donations, the Lebanese Food Bank, the Lebanese Red Cross. Myself here in Geneva, I'm working on, so I run an art space in Beirut called Station. Everything stopped since October. We're now distributing food out of Station, working with local NGOs. And I'm from Geneva now looking to see how we can help with fundraising for the arts and cultural sector, which is the one I work in. There's a lot of needs right now. If listeners can kind of reach out, and donate a bit, I think it would be very helpful to help the economy.
Nabil, thanks very much indeed. My guest today has been Nabil Canaan, the Lebanese-Swiss cultural producer, multimedia filmmaker and development consultant. Nabil, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike.
That was the McKay Interview with Michael McKay. And don't forget, you can hear that interview again on our website, worldradio.ch.